And now, Chewing the Fat Summer Sport Show with your host with the most, Bevan Jones.
We have a star today. That is the man himself, Graham Studley-Corns. He's a 1973 Premiership player with Glenelg, two-time Premiership coach. He's also an Australian Football Hall of Famer and a South Australian Football Hall of Famer. Got his own show on 5AA called Conversations with Cornsy. Cornsy, great to have you on Chewing the Fat.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm not sure I'm worthy.
So what was it like being inducted as a Hall of Famer for the Australian football and South Australian football?
Well, that was difficult because I've had this thing about halls of fame, which I'm a little bit anti, because it's not ever about one player. You know, in footy, in Australian rules footy, you got a team. When I played, there was 20. Now there's 22, and I've always had the philosophy that player number one is as important as player number 22, or vice versa. Player number 22, in my day, player number 20 is as important as player number one. And like in our 73 grand final, which you mentioned then, player number 19, John Sandlin, came off the bench and kicked 4 goals. Player number 20, Craig Marriott, came off the bench and kicked the ball, which I eventually marked to kick the goal that put us in front. So this concept of elevating one against over others has always been uncomfortable for me, and I'm in 3 halls of fame: the Glenelg one, the Sanford one, and the Australian Football Hall of Fame. So I always thought, in my own, my meandering mind, that if I was ever offered that, I might think about, rejecting it. But when I actually got the letter, that evaporated. That sentiment evaporated in a split second, really, because it's a compliment to South Australian footy as much as anything. It's a compliment to the Glenelg Footy Club. It's respectful of my family. So it was a massive thrill, particularly when you consider the players who are still not in a Hall of Fame who deserve to be there. No, look, I'd say all but. There's 1 or 2 in the Australian Football Hall of Fame whose credentials I would query, but everybody deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. There's just so many others who deserve it as much. So that's why I've always, when I've been asked would I sit on a Hall of Fame selection committee, I said no, I will not sit in judgment of peers or guys I played against. But it was a big thrill, and it remains a big thrill.
Now, obviously, winning the 1973 Premiership and the 2 as a coach as well, pretty special moments. But what are some of the other highlights of your career as a coach and a player, Graham?
Oh, God.
Where do you start, maybe?
First game's always a big deal,
Yep.
I was a kid playing footy in Whyalla. I was 19. I'd turned 19 and I was nearly given football away to go surfing. We thought we could be surfers in Whyalla by driving down to the coast, But anyway, the Glenelg invited me down and said, come back at the end of the season, we'll give you a run in the reserves. But they didn't give me a run in the reserves. They put me straight into the league team. So we played Sturt at Unley Oval, the reigning premiers. Glenelg had finished bottom the year before. We beat them in that game. Norwood lost on the day they were playing, which means Glenelg went into the finals. We couldn't miss out on the finals. So that was a big deal. The first Crows game was a massive experience, particularly the way that panned out. Our first preliminary final with the Crows, the 85 grand final at Glenelg when I was coaching, that was a relief. That wasn't a thrill. 86 was more satisfying, I'd think. And a couple of the State of Origin games, we beat Victoria on the MCG in 1993, which hadn't been done since 1963, basically. And that 63 team has been elevated into the South Australian Sport Hall of Fame. Well, I've often thought, that 93 team had to do it on the MCG in really tricky conditions. I don't ever think they've got the recognition they deserve. So there's lots of them. There's odd games. There was a game at Norwood Oval where we won the game after the siren, and there's when you talk, the games come flashing back, which is pleasant.
And you touched on it before. The 1990 was, of course, when the Adelaide Crows first came into the AFL in their first season. Must have been a thrill for you being the first ever coach of the Adelaide Crows.
Wasn't a thrill, no.
No?
It was an honour that that I realised I had to accept and live up to. There was enormous responsibility because of all the drama with Port Adelaide, and excuse my voice much, with all the drama with Port Adelaide that had led up to the formation of the Crows. So, and we had to assemble a squad first and then pare that down into a team, or get that down to a team of 52, and as well as having a team that was going to be competitive, we had to secure young players for the future. That's why, guys like Ben Hart and Sean Wren and Mark Rasciuto and Simon, like young guys who'd never really played much footy, they were included in those squads. So it was a big responsibility, and I want to make the point, I don't think the point's made often enough. Those guys who were in the first Crows squad, those 60, 70 players who assembled there in, the first week of November of 1990 and were confronted with a training regimen that they'd never experienced before. They trained 13 days out of 14. They had 3 weight sessions in the morning. When they trained right up to Christmas, which that training block concluded with that, now the infamous 100-metre sprints, which they did. So, and they did that without any promise of contracts, without any recompense for it. They did it on the hope that they'd get one of those spots in the 52 squad. So I don't ever think those guys got enough credit. And of course, it was pared down to the team that played against Hawthorn on March the 21st in 1991, and it was just a great night.
And you touched on it before with Port Adelaide. I have to ask you this question because your 2 sons were named as power players, and there was that huge rivalry back in the day between Port and Glenelg. It still is. What was it like, though, having your 2 sons representing the ultimate rivals in Port Adelaide?
Well, all of those prejudices and loyalties just fly out the window. If you've got kids who play sport, you go and watch them, and you hope they do well, and you hope the team that they're playing for wins. So, if you're a parent of a young player who's going into the draft system, hasn't been drafted yet, it's a terribly stressful time. You're not sure. Are they going to get drafted? Where are they going to get drafted to? Will they have a good career? And I was with Chad. We weren't really sure. He'd been spoken to by the West Coast Eagles. Port Adelaide had spoken to him, and it was ironic given it was more than a rivalry between Glenelg and myself and Port Adelaide. It was a real hatred to be in that towards the end of 1990. And but luckily, Alan Stewart, who was their recruiting manager at the time, he saw through that. He looked at Chad as an individual player. And we were away at the time, and my sports director at 5AA rang and said, "The draft's about to start. I'll ring you in half an hour and let you know where Chad has been drafted to." Well, he ran back in 7 minutes. He said he's gone to Port Adelaide. I said, "You're kidding." Can you cut that out?
Yeah.
It's just so that was a big deal, and it was sort of tough on Chad a little bit because he had to go to Port Adelaide and put up with the stigma of the name, but he settled in and made his way. But then Kane the same deal. He got drafted, and that was just hilarious. They ended up there, but as it turned out, it was probably much better for them to go to the Port than the Crows, and they stayed in Adelaide. They played together. They both had great careers, and both are Premiership players and all Australians. So, I couldn't have worked out. And if I'm really honest, that 2004 Premiership Day was one of the great days of our family. Really enjoyed it.
Well done, Corns. That's amazing. Now, we spoke about this before your show, Conversations with Cornsey. Where did this all come about? And tell us all about it for the listeners out there that don't know anything about it. I know it's from 3 o'clock every Monday to Friday on 5AA, so have a listen in. But tell us more about the show.
Well, it's recorded, and we only do 2 new ones every week. It sounds like I'm on every day, that I'm really busy, but I'm not. But years ago, back in maybe 2006, we fiddled with it. I wanted to do a little bit more, and the station management at the time allowed me to have half an hour program, and we did a little pilot study of it. I did about half a dozen, interviewed interesting people: Peter Fitzsimons, Terry Britton from the Twilights, Amanda Vanstone, and and I really enjoyed it. But the program never went anywhere. There was never any spot for it. They just used it to fill gaps in programming. And I didn't think any more about it. And then Richard Fidler came out with conversations, which I thought he's pinched my concept. But I'm a huge fan of Richard Fidler, don't get me wrong. And then a year or so ago, when I retired from full-time at AA, and I was just doing little spots, as you might wear, Monday night, occasional Saturday mornings, and the program director said, "Would you like to do those conversation programs again? We'll make it an hour." And because I really enjoyed it, and it was different than just sport, I jumped at it. So I've enjoyed it. It's working well at the station. So and it's not particularly arduous. And I've met some really inspirational people. So.
And speaking of 5AA, you're back with your sparring partner again, KG Cunningham. How's that going for you?
Oh God, I need a medal. No, look, we worked together for 17 years, and it was great. Only had one argument, and one serious argument. We had arguments on air, of course, and it was a shock to me when he was, when they moved him sideways, or sacked him, if I can be crude, blunt. None of us saw it coming. Well, he says he did. He's the most nervous, apprehensive person who lacks confidence, and every year he's saying, "Oh, I'm going to be sacked." I said, "You won't be sacked. We were rating consistently rating number one, even against Hamish and Andy. Like we were a syndicated, where they were number one nationally. So, but they did. I mean, they moved him on, and to have him back on Sunday morning, it's like he's never been away, to be quite frank, and he's not young anymore. But he's still a professional. He works on like a 9 o'clock program on a Saturday morning. At first, he got in at 5:45 a.m. I said, "You're kidding." 5:45 a.m. Michael Keelan wasn't even there for the 6 o'clock gardening program. I mean, he's a good guy, KG. He's a really good guy, and it all hasn't worked out for him because he lost Sandra, and he should never have been sacked here, in my opinion, anyway. But he's back, and it's a Saturday morning. I know it's not very much; it's only a couple of hours a week, but it's a lot of fun.
Good on you. And just finally, season 2019, it's going to be a big one for the Crows and Port. How do you see them both going, Causey? Could they both play finals? Well,
they could. I think the Crows seem to be nicely positioned. We've avoided all the controversy from last summer. Looks like everyone's fit. We don't have any problems with injuries. Or say we. They don't have any. I am an ambassador for them. So hopefully, but their midfield still concerns me. They need more midfield drive. They need a bit more run and penetration outside. Now, a couple of the young kids they drafted are quick and kick long, so hopefully that helps out. Defence looks reasonable. Forward line looks okay if they get good supply, but all depends on the midfield. I'd tip them to make the 8. Port Adelaide I'm concerned with. I mean, a couple of their playmakers have gone. Polek, Wingard, the young fella from the left footer, what's his name? Jasper Pittard. I know he had a few flaws in his game, but he did get drive, and he did get the ball into the forward line. They have to fix their game plan. They've got to be able to get the ball into their forward line quickly. They've got to get a balanced forward line with Charlie Dixon as a figurehead as well. I understand they're moving Jack Watts up the ground a little bit to perhaps get a bit more penetration and run. If I had to put my house on it, I can't see Port making the 8. I'm happy to be proven wrong, except if I have my house on it. But I can't see that they've improved their team. But we'll wait and see. I mean, these predictions are so easy to make, and nobody really knows.
Yeah, exactly right. It's still a long way out as well. So, well, Graham Cause, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on Chewing the Fat today. Thank you so much for your time, mate.
No, you don't mean that.
No, of course I do. Good on you.
See you.